Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. On paper, Draco Malfoy seems like someone utterly impossible to love. He's a pure-blood snob, the son of a Death Eater, raised to believe that only people like him deserve to be called wizards. He was a thorn in Harry Potter's side and did plenty of awful things. And yet, fans adore him. Even J.K. Rowling admitted she was surprised by his popularity. So what's behind it? Is it the allure of the bad boy, the charisma of Tom Felton, or is it simply that Draco is far more complex than he appears? Today, I'll walk you through the most common misconceptions about Draco Malfoy, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see him in a whole new light. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Draco isn't a hot-headed troublemaker. He's a master of patience and strategy. At first glance, Draco seems like a spoiled show-off who thrives on drama and loud exits. But beneath that bravado lies remarkable endurance and calculation. His vanishing cabinet plan is the best example of this. For nearly the entire 6th year, he worked to repair an ancient magical artifact to let Death Eaters into Hogwarts. He practiced spells, tracked teachers, and kept his activities hidden even from Snape. Few could have handled that pressure. His patience is something many fans appreciate, even if subconsciously. Number 2, he's a very capable wizard. There's a popular belief that Draco is weak at magic, and after all he lost duels to Harry and never showed much heroism. But the truth is, he wasn't just talented, he had access to magical knowledge beyond the reach of most students. He mastered occlumency, one of the most difficult mental defense techniques. He successfully placed Madame Rosmerta under the Imperious Curse and kept it hidden for months. He wasn't as brilliant as Hermione or as gifted as Harry, but he had his own strengths. Quiet, subtle, but highly effective. Number 3, he was a diligent student. To succeed in magic, one must study, and Draco studied. He grew up in a family where failure was a disgrace, success was expected, and he worked to meet those standards. It's no surprise that he was made a Slytherin prefect in his 5th year. That kind of appointment couldn't rely on pedigree alone. It required discipline and academic effort. Number 4, he might not have had the dark mark. The films never clarify this, and many viewers assume Draco became a full Death Eater, but the books never confirm the presence of the dark mark on his arm. J.K. Rowling deliberately left this detail ambiguous. There are hints that Voldemort assigned him the task of killing Dumbledore as a punishment to Lucius. But the mark itself, it's never confirmed. This opens the door to debate. Was Draco a true participant, or merely a pawn? Number 5. His family collaborated with Muggles. The Malfoys appear to be die-hard anti-Muggle supremacists, but that image is a carefully crafted mask, a convenient facade for the elite circles they wanted to impress. Before the International Statute of Secrecy was passed, the Malfoy family had profitable business ties with Muggles. In fact, they opposed the statute because it interfered with those connections. The irony is striking. For centuries, the Malfoys prospered thanks to the very people they claimed to despise. That kind of double life adds depth to Draco's character. Number 6. He had feelings for Pansy Parkinson. Draco's relationships with those around him have always raised questions. Crabbe and Goyle were more like bodyguards than real friends. They stuck around out of fear and blind loyalty. Pansy, on the other hand, is often dismissed as a love-struck schoolgirl whom Draco simply ignored. But it's not that simple. Draco didn't tolerate people he disliked, and Pansy remained in his inner circle for years. He allowed her to be close, to express her feelings, and to support him during difficult times. That suggests there were feelings, not loud or dramatic ones, but real, all the same. Number 7. Draco was afraid of Voldemort. Draco wore the black suit. He walked with the Death Eaters. He was given a mission that would place him among them forever. But he wasn't one of them. Not really. In Half-Blood Prince, we see the cracks, we see the fear. Draco is tasked with murdering Albus Dumbledore, not because he volunteered, but because Voldemort wanted to punish Lucius Malfoy. Draco was the price, and from the moment the task begins, he unravels. "I have to do this," he whispers, with his wand trembling, eyes full of tears. But he doesn't. He can't. Because he's not a killer. He's a terrified 16-year-old boy with the Dark Lord's hand around his throat. The fear isn't hidden. It bleeds into every scene. Draco isolates himself. He loses weight. He avoids friends. Moaning. Myrtle finds him sobbing in the bathroom, not crying from guilt, crying from terror. He knows that failure means death. For him and his family. "They'll kill me. They'll kill my whole family," he tells Myrtle. That's not the voice of a loyal servant of Voldemort. That's the voice of a prisoner, a pawn, someone who never believed in the cause, only in surviving it. And in that moment on the astronomy tower, when Dumbledore offers him a way out, we see it clearly. Draco didn't want power, he just wanted to live. Number 8. He wasn't Harry's main enemy. Draco Malfoy was never Harry Potter's true enemy. He insulted him, sabotaged him, challenged him, but he never tried to kill him. He didn't curse his parents. He didn't unleash monsters or plot world domination. That was Quirrell with Voldemort in his head. That was the basilisk in the chamber. That was Barty Crouch Jr. disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, and always behind it all was Voldemort. Draco, he was a rival, a schoolboy antagonist, a mirror held up to Harry, not to destroy him, but to sharpen him. Draco pushed Harry's buttons, called Hermione a mudblood, mocked Ron's poverty. He sneered during duels, gloated on broomsticks, but he also forced Harry to grow, to think, to choose who he wanted to be. When Draco refused his handshake in their first year, Harry chose friendship over privilege. When Draco tried to frame Buckbeak, Harry defended the innocent. And when Draco stood on the astronomy tower, broken and trembling, Harry saw him not as a threat, but as a boy in pain. "You're not a killer," Harry said. He was right. Malfoy wasn't the villain of the story. He was just another child caught in the storm. Number 9, he didn't fully share his family's beliefs. Draco grew up with Lucius Malfoy's voice in his ear, cold, firm, absolute. Blood matters, power matters. But by the time the war reached its peak, that voice had lost its grip. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry is captured and dragged into Malfoy Manor, it's Draco who's asked to identify him. He looks at Harry. He hesitates. "I can't be sure," he says quietly. But he is sure. He knows exactly who's in front of him. Yet he lies. Not out of fear, but out of choice. A small rebellion, a whisper against everything his family ever taught him. That moment is more than a refusal. It's a turning point. Draco doesn't want to be part of the cruelty anymore. He doesn't want blood on his hands. He isn't his father, not truly. The Malfoys spent the entire war clinging to status and survival, but Draco, by the end, isn't clinging to anything. He's letting go, letting Harry live, letting the war pass through his home without claiming one more soul. And in that silence, in that trembling pause, we see the boy breaking free from the weight of a legacy he never asked to carry. Number 10, he changed after the war. Draco didn't vanish after the Battle of Hogwarts, he changed. Not with speeches or grand gestures, but in the quiet way of a man who had seen too much. He stepped back from politics, from ambition, from everything his father once forced on him. He married Astoria Greengrass, a gentle soul who, like him, had no interest in reliving the past. Together they raised their son, Scorpius, far from the noise of blood purity and legacy. Draco didn't teach Scorpius to hate, he taught him to choose. In The Cursed Child, we see that Draco is no longer the boy sneering in corridors. He's a father who worries, who listens, who admits his own pain. "I used to envy Harry," he confesses, "because he had real friends." That line says everything. The man Draco became understood what truly mattered. He supported Scorpius's friendship with Albus Potter, the son of the very boy he once called an enemy. And when the world turned on their children, Draco stood beside Harry, not against him. He had every reason to be bitter, to cling to the past. But he didn't. He grew. The boy who once couldn't bear the thought of defiance became a man who defied his entire upbringing. He let go of the Malfoy pride. He let his son laugh with a Potter. He chose peace over power. And in that choice he proved that redemption isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in how you raise the next generation. Number 11, his bond with Snape was deeper than it seemed. Draco had no one to trust. His father was locked in Azkaban. His mother was frantic. The Dark Lord used him as a pawn. But there was one man who watched him closely, Severus Snape. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. "You are to watch over Draco Malfoy," Narcissa begged, and Snape made the unbreakable vow. He didn't flinch. He agreed to die if it meant keeping Draco alive. That wasn't just duty. It was something else, something quiet and rare. A promise made in the dark between two men who understood how easily a boy could break. Snape didn't hover. He didn't comfort. He covered for Draco in silence. When Draco vanished from class, Snape said nothing. When Harry tried to track him, Snape blocked the questions. And when Draco nearly died in the bathroom, Snape stormed in, not to punish, but to save. "There may be a slight scarring," he said calmly, wand steady, as he healed the gashes left by Sectum Sempra. But his voice was tight. His hands shook. He wasn't just patching up a student. He was protecting a boy who had run out of places to hide. Draco never thanked him. He didn't have to. Their bond wasn't made of words. It was built from glances across the room, from silences that held meaning, from the knowledge that Snape, for all his coldness, was the only adult who saw through the mask. In the chaos of the war, amid lies and betrayals, Snape remained the one fixed point. And Draco, though he never said it, leaned on him, trusted him. Because even when the world turned its back, Snape stayed. And that, for Draco Malfoy, meant everything. Number 12, he suffered from loneliness. Draco Malfoy walked the halls of Hogwarts with Crabbe and Goyle always at his side. They moved like shadows, following him without thought, ready to laugh at his cruelest jokes. But they weren't his friends. They were guards, muscle, trained from childhood to protect the heir of the Malfoy name. He didn't talk to them, he commanded them. And when things turned dark, they followed orders, not feelings. When Goyle nearly killed them all with fiend fire in the Room of Requirement, there wasn't a trace of brotherhood in the air, just chaos, just fear. Draco's laughter in the common room, his sneers in the corridors, they were a mask, a performance. Inside, he was alone, no one to confide in, no one to ask why he looked paler every term, why he disappeared after classes. "He's been disappearing off the map," said Harry in Half-Blood Prince. Not a single Slytherin asked why. No one noticed he wasn't eating. No one asked where he was when he stood crying in moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Except for Myrtle, the school ghost. "He's a sensitive boy," she said. That was Draco's only companion, a spirit haunting the pipes. He didn't sit with the others in the Great Hall as the war grew closer. He stopped bragging, stopped taunting. The confidence crumbled. The boy who once stood tall now sat with his shoulders hunched, staring into nothing. When Harry cast Sectum Sempra, Draco didn't even see it coming. He wasn't in a duel. He was washing his face, alone in the mirror, with no one to watch his back. Bleeding on the floor of a bathroom, crying for help, and only Snape came. That's not the fate of a golden boy surrounded by admiration. That's isolation. The truth is, Draco was trapped, not just by family or duty or fear, but by solitude. He didn't trust anyone because he was never taught how. Not even Pansy Parkinson, who clung to him, could reach the boy buried beneath the mask. And in that silence, in those empty pauses between his forced smirks, the real Draco lived. Not the villain, Not the bully, just a boy who had no one and didn't know how to ask for someone. Number 13, Draco wasn't just a petty tattletale. From the very first year at Hogwarts, Draco Malfoy gained a reputation as a tattletale. He was the boy who ran to Professor Snape to report every misstep Harry, Ron, or Hermione made. "I'll tell my father about this," he often said. And with that one line, he cemented the image of a petty boy hiding behind authority. But Draco wasn't simply a coward seeking attention. He was playing the only game he knew. In the Malfoy household, informing on others wasn't frowned upon. It was praised. Obedience, discipline, and loyalty to your own were virtues. Draco was raised in a world where power didn't come from rebellion, but from control and alliances. So when he ran to Snape or bragged about his father's influence at the Ministry, he wasn't trying to be pathetic. He was surviving in a structure that rewarded precisely that behavior. Unlike Harry, who questioned rules from the start, Draco trusted the system, because it was built for people like him. But the boy who once relied on adults to fight his battles changed. In Half-Blood Prince, we see Draco alone, pale, thinner, and haunted. He doesn't go to Snape. He doesn't run to his father. When he's assigned the task of killing Dumbledore, he takes it on himself, trembling, breaking, but silent. "No one can help me," he says with a shaking voice when Snape tries to intervene. That moment on the astronomy tower is not the voice of a tattletale. It's the voice of a boy who now carries a secret so heavy he'd rather die than confess it. The boy who once cried out for help in every hallway now hides in empty bathrooms, staring into the sink, bleeding. Draco was crying. No, he was sobbing. His whole body was shaking. Half-Blood Prince, Chapter 24. The transformation is painful and clear. He no longer needs others to step in. He's forced to grow up in silence, and he does. That alone strips away the old label. He might have started as a boy who tattled, but he became something far more complex. Number 14. He didn't think of himself as a villain. Draco Malfoy never saw himself as a villain. That is perhaps the most fascinating truth about him. From the very beginning of his time at Hogwarts, he behaved with arrogance and contempt toward those outside his house, but not because he believed himself to be cruel. He simply believed he was right. The world, as he had been taught, was structured by lineage, power, and loyalty to tradition. To Draco, Gryffindors were rash, foolish, and sentimental. Hufflepuffs were irrelevant. Ravenclaws were oddities. Slytherin was strength, and strength was what mattered. When he scoffed at Ron's hand-me-down robes or Hermione's parentage, it wasn't out of hatred. It was because, in his world, these were unquestionable truths. To Draco, being a Malfoy meant being superior, and that was as natural to him as breathing. From the first time he laid eyes on Harry Potter, Draco saw a rival. Not because Harry had done anything to deserve hostility, but because Harry represented everything Draco was taught to disdain: fame without pedigree, courage without discipline, influence without heritage. Draco offered his friendship in their first year, not out of genuine warmth, but because that was how alliances were forged in the world he came from. When Harry refused, publicly and with quiet judgment, Draco felt insulted, humiliated, and most importantly, justified in his distaste. From then on, he viewed Harry as a reckless show-off, someone who refused to respect the old order. Draco wasn't evil, he was offended. As years passed, this belief grew deeper. When Harry and his friends continually broke rules, snuck out of bounds, and meddled in things beyond their comprehension, Draco saw disorder. He saw weakness masked as bravery. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter," he said early on. And to him it was not a threat, but a warning, a statement of natural hierarchy. Even when Harry faced dangers and earned respect, Draco did not admire him. He pitied him for being guided by feelings rather than legacy. But Draco's path darkened, not through ambition, but through inheritance. By the time he was 16, Voldemort had returned, and his family was under the microscope. Lucius Malfoy, once an untouchable aristocrat, had been imprisoned in Azkaban for his failures at the Department of Mysteries. Narcissa, proud and poised, was now desperate, and Draco, still a boy, was given a task that was in truth a death sentence. Kill Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, or suffer the consequences. The Dark Lord used Draco not for his skill, but as a tool to punish his parents. Draco accepted the task because he had to, but more than that because he still believed in some fading part of his heart that this was a way to restore honor to his family. If he succeeded, perhaps the Malfoy name could be feared and respected once again. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about reclaiming pride. Yet inside, doubt was blooming. The boy who had once sneered at Muggleborns was now a terrified teenager, trying to repair a vanishing cabinet in the Room of Requirement, while the pressure mounted around him like a storm. The burden began to crush him. He grew thinner, paler. His arrogance became a mask barely holding. Even his taunts lost their edge. In Half-Blood Prince, the moment when Harry and Draco duel in the bathroom is a clear turning point. Harry casts Sectum Sempra, unaware of its power, and Draco bleeds, terrified and shocked. It is the first time Draco is truly vulnerable before Harry, not as an enemy, but as a human being. There was a great gash across his chest, the book reads. His blood splattered the floor. There was no pretense in that moment. No house rivalry. Just a boy breaking under pressure. When the time finally came, and Draco stood on the astronomy tower with Dumbledore, he could not kill him. His wand trembled. His voice was hollow. Dumbledore, even weakened, saw the boy for what he was, not a killer, but a child in over his head. "You are not a killer, Draco," Dumbledore said. And he was right. In that moment, everything Draco had been raised to believe clashed with what he now saw. Murder was not a rite of passage. It was not a way to reclaim pride. It was a line he could not cross. What makes Draco's story compelling is that his transformation is quiet. He does not renounce his beliefs with a dramatic speech. He does not throw away his wand or declare a new allegiance. His shift is slow, painful, and incomplete. Even in Deathly Hallows, he continues to hover in ambiguity. He does not fight beside Voldemort, but he does not fight against him either. He helps identify Harry at Malfoy Manor, but hesitates, pretending not to be sure. That hesitation is everything. In a world of absolutes, Draco hesitated, and that hesitation, small as it was, spoke of change. When the Battle of Hogwarts began, Draco was not on the front lines. He was searching for safety, perhaps even redemption. He entered the Room of Requirement to find Harry, not to ambush him, but to retrieve something of value, perhaps for himself, perhaps for the Dark Lord. He still wore the cloak of allegiance, but it no longer fit him. He was a boy caught in a storm that was no longer his. When Goyle's fiendfire consumed the room, it was Harry who saved Draco, pulling him from the flames. That moment stripped away all rivalry. A Gryffindor saving a Slytherin. An enemy saving a boy. Number 15. He carried emotional scars. Draco Malfoy stood at the pinnacle of Slytherin pride, elegant, composed, and cruel. His name carried weight, his words cut like blades, and his contempt for Harry Potter seemed boundless. But beneath the finely pressed robes and inherited arrogance was something broken. Few readers ever paused to consider what it meant to grow up under the shadow of Lucius Malfoy and the cold stare of Voldemort. The Draco we meet in the early books is a boy performing a role written for him long before he could understand the rules of the world he was born into. As a child, Draco was raised in Malfoy Manor, a place of luxury and secrets. Behind the marble walls and vast portraits of scowling ancestors, the boy learned not to laugh too loud, not to question too much, and never to show fear. His father, Lucius, lived by rigid expectations, discipline, ambition, pure blood supremacy. Draco's mother, Narcissa, was quieter, but no less bound by the same code. To survive in the Malfoy household meant to perform perfectly and never allow vulnerability to surface. For a child, that burden is a kind of emotional starvation. Love in that world came in the form of expectations and threats. It was never soft. Draco's earliest lesson in fear arrived not at Hogwarts, but during the fall of Voldemort. The boy was too young to remember the Dark Lord's first rise, but he saw with wide eyes what happened to his family when their master vanished. Lucius Malfoy, once a powerful figure in the Ministry's dark corners, fell into disgrace. He saved himself by claiming he had been under the Imperious curse, but the stain remained. The whispers, the social decline, the constant tension in the manor, it all settled into Draco like a fog. He watched his father drink more, pace more, lash out when the fire went too low. And so he learned, power can vanish overnight, and loyalty is only as safe as its master. By the time Draco stepped onto the Hogwarts Express for the first time, he had already perfected his disguise. He modelled himself after his father, aloof, proud, dismissive of anyone who didn't come from old wizarding families. He gravitated toward children like Crabbe and Goyle, not because he admired them, but because they obeyed him. Their brute loyalty was a comfort. It was safety disguised as friendship. In Harry Potter, he saw not just a rival, but a threat. Harry's fame was unearned, his presence disruptive, and his friendships a foreign concept to Draco. In that first encounter, he offered Harry an alliance. Rejected, he turned quickly to mockery, establishing the only defense he understood: control through cruelty. Draco's taunts and arrogance were not born from superiority, they were survival tools. At Hogwarts, he replicated the rules of his home: dominate before you can be dominated. It's why he antagonized Hermione for her blood status, why he sneered at Ron's poverty. He wasn't aiming for cleverness, he was building walls. If he reminded the world who he was, a Malfoy, a pureblood, a legacy, perhaps he wouldn't have to face how deeply insecure he really felt. It is in Half-Blood Prince that the mask begins to crack. Assigned a task by Voldemort himself, Draco is suddenly elevated to the position of Death Eater, not because of his skills, but as punishment for Lucius's failures. He is a 16-year-old boy handed a murder and a death sentence in the same breath. He seemed such a child, thin, white-faced, with eyes that seemed too large for his head, the narration notes in Half-Blood Prince. When Harry sees Draco in Madame Malkin's robe shop, this is not the proud boy of the first years, this is someone unraveling. Throughout the 6th book, Draco isolates himself. He withdraws from his usual clique, avoids laughter, avoids conflict. When he appears, he is often pale, shaking, distracted. He stops eating. He disappears into the room of requirement to work endlessly on the vanishing cabinet, a desperate attempt to complete his mission and save his family. Failure means death. Success means letting Death Eaters into Hogwarts. Every path leads to destruction. The boy who once thrived on petty cruelty now lives in a private hell, and no one seems to see it. In the bathroom scene, when Harry confronts Draco and uses Sectum Sempra, the reader sees the physical cost of his collapse. Blood pours out, and with it, so does the truth. Draco was on the floor, his hand pressed to his face, the blood dripping through his fingers. It is a shocking moment, not just because of the violence, but because we finally see Draco vulnerable and alone. His pain is real, his fear undeniable. He has lost control of the situation, and there's no sarcasm sharp enough to shield him. Snape heals him, but it's clear that something permanent has shifted. Even Harry, who has spent years loathing Draco, is shaken by what he's done. He realizes, however briefly, that Draco is not the villain he always imagined. He is a boy forced into a role no one should bear. The duel was not between enemies. It was between two terrified teenagers shaped by war. In Deathly Hallows, the damage is irreversible. Draco Malfoy is no longer a performer. At Malfoy Manor, when the trio is captured, Draco is asked to identify Harry. He hesitates. He lies. He says he's not sure. That moment, small on the surface, is monumental. Here is Draco face to face with Voldemort's followers, and instead of claiming power or revenge, he chooses mercy. He cannot bring himself to hand over Harry, even after years of rivalry. That choice is not cowardice. It is the first truly brave act of his life. Number 16, he could have been Harry's ally. In an alternate weave of fate that challenges our most cherished narratives, the possibility that Draco Malfoy could have allied with Harry Potter emerges as a tantalizing proposition. The story unfolds in a universe where two young boys, burdened by the weight of their respective legacies, found in each other not enemies, but mirrors of struggle. Draco, often portrayed as cold and arrogant, is reimagined as a soul yearning for acceptance, while Harry's innate empathy tempts him to embrace the misunderstood. As J.K. Rowling herself mused in a rare moment of reflection, had Harry extended his hand to Draco on the first Hogwarts Express. Carriage, the very fabric of their destinies, might have been rewritten. It matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be, echoed silently in this uncharted corridor of possibility. In this alternative narrative, the corridors of Hogwarts are filled with whispered speculations about the boy who could have been a friend instead of an adversary. Draco's initial intrigue in Harry is portrayed with fresh nuance. His interest was sparked not by contempt, but by a deep-seated yearning for connection. Moments of solitary introspection reveal that his smouldering curiosity was not simply disdain, but an unspoken desire to belong. Amid the cold marble halls and flickering torches, Draco's inner conflict is as potent as the spells taught in Professor Snape's classroom. His every glance towards the scarred boy reflects a silent acknowledgement of kindred suffering and potential unity against the forces of injustice. A pivotal scene arises on a rain-soaked afternoon, where the reflective surfaces of the ancient castle mirror the tumult within Draco's heart. Wand in hand, he paces the dimly lit corridor, the weight of his family name battling against a tender hope for redemption. It is in this charged atmosphere that he recalls an encounter with Harry during a mundane moment on the train, a fleeting gesture laden with unspoken empathy. Historical texts within the castle walls suggest that the moment was less about hostility and more about misunderstanding. In the echo of silence, Draco's choice looms large: to continue the legacy of enmity or to seize a rare opportunity to defy his predetermined path. The narrative progresses into a realm where the lines between right and wrong blur as both boys confront the inherent prejudices that defined their worlds. One crisp autumn afternoon in the Gryffindor common room, as the golden light cascaded over time-worn portraits, Harry inadvertently recalled an old saying, "It is our choices that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." These familiar words reverberated in his mind as he considered the potential ally lying in wait in the shadows of Slytherin's corridors. While Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger remained steadfast in their loyalty, Harry's intuitive understanding of another's pain beckoned him to contemplate a friendship that could dismantle years of institutional enmity and offer a glimmer of hope to a fractured wizarding society. In the midst of the brewing tumult on the castle grounds, the vibrant tapestry of student life was punctuated by moments of quiet introspection. Draco's every step resonated with the quiet yet insistent desire to break free from his predetermined role. He recalled the stern words of his father, a legacy enshrouded in rigid tradition and a whisper of rebellion that had long been smothered by expectation. In a small, rarely trodden corridor behind the library, Draco secretly revisited snippets from forgotten books on morality, where Dumbledore's wisdom was inscribed in gentle calligraphy. Differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open. The lesson was as poignant as it was dangerous in his tumultuous world. A singular moment of introspection in the shadow of the Forbidden Forest revealed a Draco far removed from the sneers and malice the world had come to expect. His boots trod softly upon the leaf-strewn ground as he envisioned a future where he and Harry united to challenge the oppressive dictates of dark magic and prejudice. The forest became a metaphor for inner transformation, a wilderness where his hidden vulnerabilities could flourish into strength. He contemplated how their combined courage, tempered by empathy, and an unyielding commitment to truth might defy the ominous forces rallying against the light. In such a meeting of souls, the chaos of their turbulent upbringing was slowly transmuted into the harmonious potential of solidarity. A remarkable incident that further emboldened this imagined alliance took place during a clandestine midnight journey through the castle's secret passageways. Within these ancient, torchlit corridors, historical paintings narrated tales of triumph over adversity. Here, Draco encountered a young first-year student who, having been ostracized for his unorthodox ideas, reminded him of the very qualities that characterized Harry Potter: bravery, resilience, and an unwavering sense of justice. This encounter was not merely happenstance, but a carefully orchestrated moment in time, a symbolic echo that their shared experiences could bridge even the deepest divides. In the hushed ambience of forbidden corridors, the seeds of an unexpected camaraderie were sown. In the intricately woven tapestry of this alternate realm, the weight of expectation shifted like the turning pages of a well-worn tome. The narrative is punctuated by specific examples that lend clarity to the transformative potential of an unlikely alliance. For instance, when confronted by the injustice meted out to Neville Longbottom after a botched defense against dark forces, Draco's quiet intervention, spurred by a profound sense of empathy, became a catalyst for change. Here, a single act of defiance against prevailing norms signified a newfound solidarity with those suffering under the weight of magical oppression. His actions, though subtle, resonated with the quiet power of redemption, challenging not only the prejudices of his peers, but the very tenets of his family's legacy. Number 17. He deserves sympathy. Draco Malfoy was born into a legacy that was not his own making. From the moment he entered the world, the Malfoy name carried weight, but that weight was a burden disguised as privilege. Lucius Malfoy, a proud Death Eater with deep ties to Lord Voldemort, raised his only son in a world of polished silverware, ancient magic, and dangerous ideologies. Narcissa, his mother, loved him fiercely, but love in the Malfoy household often came bound with fear. At Malfoy Manor, power was everything. Draco learned to obey, to uphold, to represent a lineage that brooked no weakness, but hidden beneath the arrogance he projected at school was a child suffocating under expectations no child should ever face. At 11, Draco came to Hogwarts already wearing armor. He wasn't afforded the freedom to be unsure or to discover who he might become. His father's expectations followed him like a shadow. He immediately targeted Harry Potter, not out of pure malice, but because aligning with the boy who lived would have meant challenging his own upbringing. When Harry refused his hand in friendship in their first year, Draco's bitterness began. But this was not the root of cruelty. It was the sting of rejection layered upon years of conditioning. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others," he had said on the train. He wasn't speaking for himself. He was reciting his father. Throughout the early years at Hogwarts, Draco played the part expected of him, the bully, the rival, the proud Slytherin. But his worst crimes were mostly childish: jabs, hexes, petty insults. The true turning point in Draco's story came not in the classroom, but in the shifting tides of war. When Lucius fell from Voldemort's favor after the events, At the Department of Mysteries, in Order of the Phoenix, punishment came not directly to him, but to his son. Voldemort handed Draco an impossible task: kill Albus Dumbledore. This was not an assignment, it was a death sentence. No 16-year-old should have been placed in such a position. While his classmates studied for exams and argued about Quidditch, Draco was spiraling into darkness. In Half-Blood Prince, the change in him is unmistakable. He grows paler, quieter. He looks ill, Hermione remarks. Harry watches him obsessively, convinced Draco is up to something. And he is. But this time, Draco isn't plotting a childish prank or sabotage. He's orchestrating murder, or at least trying to. Not because he wants to, but because refusal means death. For him, for his mother, maybe for his entire family. Draco's task consumes him. He spends hours in the room of requirement, alone, working on the vanishing cabinet that will bring Death Eaters into Hogwarts. His pride won't allow him to ask for help, but his fear seeps through every crack in his carefully maintained facade. We see him weep in the bathroom, we see him tremble when he points his wand, and in the most critical moment, when he stands face to face with Dumbledore on the astronomy tower, we see his humanity laid bare. Draco, Dumbledore says gently, you are not a killer. And he's right. Draco hesitates. His wand shakes, and though he's surrounded by darkness, he cannot cross that final line. It is easy to condemn Draco for enabling the Death Eaters' attack on the castle, but it is much harder, and much more honest, to acknowledge the anguish behind his actions. He was a child, tasked with adult horrors. Voldemort didn't choose Draco because he was capable. He chose him because it was cruel, because it would break Lucius, because failure was inevitable. And Draco, caught in a war not of his choosing, bore that weight silently. We never see him revel in power, we only see him erode. By Deathly Hallows, Draco is a ghost of who he once was. At Malfoy Manor, when Harry, Ron and Hermione are captured and brought before the Death Eaters, Draco is asked to identify Harry. He doesn't. I can't be sure, he says. This isn't cowardice, this is defiance. Quiet, terrified, but real. In that moment, Draco chooses not to send his enemy to death. He risks his life to protect someone who, in school, had humiliated him. He doesn't do it out of friendship. He does it because he is not Voldemort's creature, not really. Later, during the Battle of Hogwarts, Draco is still tangled in fear. He doesn't fight for Voldemort. He doesn't fight at all. But when Harry saves his life in the room of requirement, pulling him and Goyle from the fiend fire, something shatters. The world is no longer black and white. The boy he hated, the boy he once mocked, chose to save him. Not once, but twice. And though Draco never thanks Harry, that moment becomes a turning point. His silence is heavy, but it is not empty. After the war, Draco does not seek glory. He does not rebuild his family's influence in politics or in power. He disappears from the public eye, marries Astoria Greengrass, a woman who, like him, believed in change, in quiet healing. In The Cursed Child, we learn that Draco raises his son Scorpius with a gentler hand. He does not fill him with hatred. He encourages him to befriend Albus Potter, even if that friendship is scorned. And when rumours swirl that Scorpius is the child of Voldemort, Draco stands firm in his defence. My son is the best part of me, he says. He's my redemption. This is not the arc of a villain. It is the arc of a survivor. Draco is not absolved. He is accountable for his cruelty at school, for his choices, for his weaknesses, but he is not evil. He's not even hateful. He is a boy born into a poisonous legacy who, through pain and loss, unlearns the lies of his upbringing. He is the embodiment of what it means to be shaped and reshaped by circumstance. It's telling that J.K. Rowling herself later spoke of Draco's enduring appeal. "I do not see him as a hero," she said, "but I do think he was a boy who found himself in impossible situations and responded in the only way he knew how." This perspective has resonated deeply with readers over the years. For many, Draco is not admired for his power or cruelty, but for his struggle, and for how painfully real that struggle feels. Even his most toxic traits, his obsession with blood purity, his arrogance, his petty rivalries, stem from inherited values, not self-chosen beliefs. When he calls Hermione a mudblood in Chamber of Secrets, it is shocking. But the word is not his invention. It is a family heirloom, passed down like silverware and secrets. Over time, we witness how the ideas that once gave Draco superiority instead isolate him. His Slytherin pride becomes a prison. Draco's isolation is, perhaps, the most tragic element of his character. Despite being surrounded by classmates and flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, Draco has no real friends. He's admired, feared, envied, but never known. When he struggles, he does so in silence. When he fails, he hides it. And when he finally begins to see the cracks in everything he believed, he has no one to guide him. His redemption arc is not public or celebrated. It's lonely, quiet, and deeply personal. This subtle journey of self-awareness is what makes Draco Malfoy resonate even years after the books ended. He represents the complexity of growing up, of discovering that the people you idolized were flawed, that the beliefs you were taught may be wrong, that doing the right thing is sometimes impossible when you are terrified. His story is a cautionary tale about what happens when a child is given pride instead of love, dogma instead of truth. Perhaps the most telling scene is in the epilogue. 19 years later, on the platform at King's Cross, Draco watches Harry from a distance. He doesn't speak to him, he simply nods. The gesture is small, but it carries the weight of years. He is no longer the boy who sneered and scoffed. He is a man who understands the value of peace. And that nod, restrained, silent, says more than words could. Through Draco Malfoy, Rowling offered a mirror to many readers. Not everyone is brave like Harry or brilliant like Hermione. Some are scared, some are shaped by pain, some lash out before they learn to reach out. Draco is that person, and because of that, he's profoundly human. He is what happens when the world expects you to be cruel, and you slowly, painfully learn how not to be. To understand Draco is to understand the quiet tragedies of the wizarding world, the children raised with hatred, the families fractured by war, the legacy of fear that lingers long after the dark mark fades. He reminds us that redemption doesn't require triumph. Sometimes it's just the choice to be better, even when no one is watching. And maybe that is why we still talk about him. Because in Draco Malfoy we see the boy who could have been lost, but wasn't. The boy who almost became his father, but didn't. And the man who learned, too late, but still in time, that compassion is stronger than blood. Number 18. He wasn't a coward. Malfoy's reputation was sealed from the moment he extended his pale hand to Harry Potter in their first year at Hogwarts. The sneer on his face, the air of superiority, and the arrogant lineage of his family formed a perfect picture of a spoiled, cowardly boy hiding behind the shadow of others more powerful. Over the years, readers have often dismissed him as a bully, a side character without depth, a product of his upbringing. But that perception betrays a profound misreading of his journey. A closer examination of his actions, especially during the darkest moments of the Wizarding War, reveals something else entirely. Draco Malfoy was not a coward. He was a boy burdened with impossible expectations, forced to make decisions that would break grown men. And he faced those decisions not with bravery in the traditional sense, but with something even more difficult. He stood still when others would have run. In their first year, Draco mocked Hagrid's care of magical creatures and trembled at the thought of venturing into the Forbidden Forest for detention. That image of him, nervous, reluctant, deeply uncomfortable, became fixed in the minds of his peers. But it is a shallow measure of courage. Draco wasn't afraid of the forest because he was weak. He was afraid because he understood what it meant to put oneself in danger. That knowledge never left him. While others like Harry often rushed into peril with reckless passion, Draco's fear was rooted in reason. He feared what might happen not just to himself, but to his parents, his status, his very future. He was terrified because he had more to lose. Courage isn't always loud, it doesn't always wear armor or wield wands with dramatic flair. Sometimes it is quieter, desperate, and trembles beneath the weight of consequences. When Voldemort returned, Draco was 15, still a boy, and yet he was asked to do the work of monsters. After Lucius Malfoy's failure at the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort needed to punish the family, and he did so by handing Draco an impossible task: assassinate Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard alive. It wasn't a challenge, it was a death sentence, and Draco knew it. For an entire year, he carried that burden. He wandered Hogwarts with shadowed eyes and a growing sense of isolation. The once flamboyant child who delighted in taunts and schoolyard cruelty became withdrawn. As others noticed his change, Harry, Snape, even Dumbledore, no one could truly understand what was brewing behind his silence. He wasn't plotting for glory. He wasn't doing this out of ideological devotion to Voldemort. He was trying to keep his family alive. He built a vanishing cabinet in secret, repaired it with painstaking detail, and experimented with magical theory that would have baffled students far more gifted than him. This wasn't the work of a spoiled brat. It was the desperate engineering of a boy trying to construct an escape hatch from certain death. All the while, he knew that the plan would bring Death Eaters into the school and endanger everyone, but he also knew that if he failed, Voldemort would turn his wrath on Narcissa and Lucius. What choice did he really have? On the night it mattered most, Draco stood atop the astronomy tower with Dumbledore at his mercy. He had disarmed the old headmaster, one of the only people in the wizarding world who had ever shown him kindness without expectation, and stood with wand raised. It was in this moment that the truth about Draco came into focus. He was shaking, he was crying, but he was not running. Cowards flee, cowards surrender to terror. Draco stayed. Dumbledore, calm and certain of the boy's soul, told him, "Draco, you are not a killer." And he was right. The wand trembled in Draco's hand, but he couldn't do it. He had been trained, conditioned, even threatened into carrying out this murder. But when the moment arrived, something in him resisted. He saw the humanity of the man before him. He saw the enormity of what it meant to take a life. And he chose not to. In the end, it was Severus Snape who stepped in and delivered the killing blow, fulfilling the unbreakable vow he had made to Narcissa. But even that act was a result of Draco's failure, or rather, his triumph. Because not killing Dumbledore was a decision that changed the course of his life. It was the moment he broke from the path Voldemort had carved for him. And it took courage. When the Death Eaters overtook Hogwarts, Draco was not celebrated. Voldemort was not pleased. He hadn't succeeded in his mission, and he had shown weakness. But Draco's failure was his redemption. His reluctance was his salvation. And in that failure, he proved stronger than the followers who had no hesitation when given an order to kill. He retained a part of his soul that others lost. Later, during the Battle of Hogwarts, his role became even murkier. He was no longer aligned fully with either side. He tried to find Harry, perhaps out of obligation, perhaps out of lingering confusion about where he truly belonged. He wandered through the halls of the ruined castle, not as a fighter, but as a lost boy, still trying to find a way to survive without damning what remained of himself. It wasn't heroism in the way the books often celebrate, but it wasn't cowardice either. His interactions with Harry in the Room of Requirement revealed another layer. Despite years of animosity, Draco didn't lash out when Harry saved his life. He didn't scream or fight when confronted with the ruins of the world he once knew. Instead, he watched, he absorbed. And in his silence, he began to change. The boy who once ridiculed Hagrid and Hermione had learned that survival came not from cruelty or lineage, but from choices, often impossible ones. One of the most overlooked moments in the series comes after the war, when Draco returns to a broken home, his family intact but disgraced. He no longer struts, he no longer speaks with contempt. In the Deathly Hallows, during the final chapters, we see Draco standing beside his parents, not with pride, but with quiet relief. They are alive. That is enough. He doesn't celebrate Voldemort's downfall, nor does he join the heroes, but he has become something that matters more than either. He has become a survivor. The quote from Deathly Hallows during the final duel between Harry and Voldemort is telling. As Harry calls out Draco's name in the Great Hall, asking for someone to bring him his wand, Draco hesitates. Then he walks slowly across the room and tosses the wand to Harry. It is not a grand gesture, but it is everything. He chooses sides, not with fanfare, but with action. He gives his wand to the boy he once hated. And in that moment he says more than words ever could. Years later, in The Cursed Child, Draco as a father is not the same boy we once knew. He is a quiet man, deeply protective of his son Scorpius. He no longer seeks attention or power. He speaks of love. He mourns the past. And he watches his child with an anxiety born not from pride, but from fear that the mistakes of his youth will return to haunt the next generation. That kind of reflection is not born in cowards. It is born in men who once walked through fire and emerged not unscathed but conscious. Draco's journey, more than many others in the series, is marked by internal war. He is not driven by destiny or prophecy. He is not chosen. He's simply a boy who made 1,000 small decisions under pressure, many of which could have ended in tragedy. But they didn't. He erred. Yes, he hurt others. He acted cruelly. But when it came time to destroy someone completely, he couldn't do it. And that matters. In the grand narrative of Harry Potter, bravery is often linked to the Gryffindors, the daring, the bold, the reckless. But the story gives us other forms of courage too. Neville Longbottom stands up to his friends. Severus Snape lives a double life for love. And Draco Malfoy refuses to kill when it would have been easier to obey. He stands, wand raised, heartbreaking, and he chooses mercy. That is courage. He feared the forbidden forest, yes. He dreaded punishment. He mocked others to conceal his own insecurities. But he never betrayed who he was at his core. Even under the thumb of the Dark Lord, even when surrounded by violence, Draco did not surrender to darkness completely. He hovered at the edge of the abyss, stared into it, and blinked. That takes strength. In the tapestry of the wizarding world, Draco's thread is one of shadows and silver, not golden, not pure, but strong. He is a boy who was shaped by fear, but who learned to face it without becoming it. He wasn't loud, he wasn't noble in the traditional sense. But when everything collapsed, Draco Malfoy stood still. He did not flee, he did not strike, he chose not to kill. And in that silence, in that moment of trembling defiance, Draco proved that he was never a coward at all. Number 19. He respected Hermione deep down. Draco Malfoy was not a simple boy. Behind the sneers and the taunts, behind the proud tilt of his chin and the cold drawl in his voice, was something far more complex than open hatred. His contempt for Hermione Granger was loud and visible, etched into moments like that first insult on the Hogwarts Express, and the countless times he called her a mudblood, one of the most repulsive slurs in the wizarding world. But buried beneath that poisonous language was a feeling he could not name, one that clawed at his carefully built walls. It was not hate, Not really. It was something far more uncomfortable: respect. He would never admit it, not even to himself in the early years. To recognize her strength would mean acknowledging that she, a Muggle-born, could not only stand equal to him, but surpass him. That defied everything he had been taught at home. His father, Lucius Malfoy, had made it clear from the start: bloodline was everything. Intelligence, effort, even magical talent meant nothing without pure ancestry. And yet there Hermione was, top of nearly every class, outshining Draco in spells, potions and theory. Even Snape, who favored his own house, could not always conceal her excellence. It was maddening. During their second year, when the Chamber of Secrets had been opened, Draco taunted the school with glee, enjoying the fear that gripped Muggle-born students. But when Hermione was attacked and lay petrified in the hospital wing, something shifted. He never spoke of it, but his eyes lingered too long on her still form during one of the many hospital wing visits, always pretending to be checking on other students. The smirk on his face faded for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides. Not because he was happy she was gone, but because her silence left him unsettled. The castle without Hermione was too quiet, too unbalanced. Her presence had been a constant challenge. Without her, the air seemed easier, but not better. He loathed how often teachers praised her. Even McGonagall, strict and impartial, seemed to hold her in high regard. Hermione answered every question, solved every riddle, and did so with the precision of someone who had worked for it, not inherited it. That stung Draco in ways he couldn't understand. He had always believed in his superiority, but Hermione cracked that belief open with every successful spell she cast. She didn't just defy his prejudice, she rendered it ridiculous. In their third year, during Buckbeak's trial, Draco saw another side of Hermione: her loyalty. When he exaggerated his injury to get Hagrid's beloved creature condemned, Hermione's fury was volcanic. Her voice, so often used to answer questions or explain incantations, turned to fire when she defended the truth. Even after he insulted her repeatedly, even after he took pride in Buckbeak's sentencing, she never flinched. She stood up for what she believed in. She even punched him, one of the few people in the castle who dared to touch the heir of the Malfoy name. That moment humiliated Draco publicly, but privately it left a deeper impact. Not just because of the sting in his jaw, but because of the unshakable force that was Hermione's conviction. Fourth year brought the Triwizard Tournament, and with it the return of old fears and hierarchies. Draco, ever loyal to his father's ideology, mocked Hermione's association with Harry and the Champions. He mocked Victor Crumb's interest in her, made jokes about her teeth and appearance. But when she entered the Yule Ball in her periwinkle blue dress, head high and grace in every step, Draco stared longer than he should have. He made a cruel comment under his breath to Crabbe and Goyle, but his eyes betrayed him. There was awe there. She had transformed, not into someone else, but into someone he could no longer deny was remarkable. That same year, in the library, he once caught sight of her through the bookshelves. She didn't see him, or maybe pretended not to. She was absorbed in arithmancy, notes scattered around her like a scholar in a sea of logic. He watched for a moment longer than necessary. She bit her lip as she worked, her brows furrowed in thought. There was no audience, no one to impress. She simply wanted to learn. Draco felt a twinge of something alien in that moment. Not envy, not even disdain, something closer to recognition. By fifth year, the tension between them had deepened. The creation of Dumbledore's army, her defiance against the Ministry and Umbridge, put her in direct opposition to everything Draco aligned with. And yet he felt his strange pride watching her rebel. He would never have dared to cross his father the way she stood up to authority. He called her names, ridiculed her efforts, but inside he marveled at the nerve it took. When she cast the Patronus during DA lessons, the silver otter danced through the room of requirement with effortless elegance. Draco saw it once from a distance. He never told anyone. There is something devastating in being bested by someone you are supposed to despise. That was Draco's constant wound. Every time Hermione answered a question faster, every time she received praise for her essays or her spell work, it reminded him that his bloodline gave him no advantage over her. Worse, it made him question whether it ever had. And so he fought back in the only way he knew, with cruelty. He mimicked the superiority he had learned at home, spat words meant to sting, and turned his confusion into malice. "You'll pay for that one, Mudblood," he said during their second year. But even then his voice had trembled just slightly. By sixth year, everything began to unravel. Voldemort had returned, and Draco was given a task that would hollow out any boy, assassinate the headmaster of Hogwarts. That year, he didn't have time to hate Hermione. He didn't even have the energy, but he still noticed her. When she walked the halls with Harry and Ron, faces tense, he sometimes glanced her way, not with scorn, but with a strange weariness. Once, they passed each other in the corridor near the astronomy tower. She looked at him with narrowed eyes as if trying to read him. He said nothing. He couldn't. That year, in the bathroom, after Harry cursed him with Sectum Sempra, Draco bled onto the floor, vulnerable and frightened for the first time. He realized how fragile he really was. Hermione didn't see that moment, but later, when Draco returned to classes pale and distant, she looked at him longer than usual. There was no triumph in her gaze, only something quiet. Pity, maybe, or understanding. Draco hated it. But a part of him was grateful. In seventh year, when the trio disappeared and Voldemort's grip on Hogwarts tightened, Draco saw what the world without Hermione looked like again. The Carrows ruled with violence, and cruelty became law. There was no one to challenge it the way Hermione had, no one to question, to fight, to rebel. The castle had grown sick without her. He never said it aloud, but he noticed her absence like a missing star in the night sky. And when they returned, everything was fire and chaos. The Battle of Hogwarts broke every boundary. In the room of requirement, when Hermione helped Harry retrieve the diadem, Draco was there, reluctantly, fearfully. When the fiendfire consumed the room, she risked her life to escape, her wand out, her eyes blazing. She could have left him behind, but she didn't. Later, he learned it was Ron who saved him, but Hermione had paused. She had looked back. Even after all the venom he had spewed, she still saw him as a human being. That mercy was more powerful than any spell. After the war, years passed. They rarely spoke, but their paths crossed occasionally in the corridors of the Ministry or during formal events. Draco never apologized. He wasn't sure he knew how. But once, during a Wizengamot hearing, he watched Hermione present a case for the humane treatment of house elves. Her voice was clear, unwavering. The same fire he'd seen since childhood now wielded power. He felt something rise in his chest, something like admiration. Not the admiration one reserves for a friend, but for a warrior. He once overheard his own son, Scorpius, say that Hermione Granger was the bravest witch of her age. Draco didn't correct him. In fact, he said nothing at all for a long time. Then quietly he added, "She always was." That was the only acknowledgement he ever gave, but it was enough. The truth is, Draco's aggression toward Hermione had always been more about himself than about her. She stood for everything he had been taught to fear: change, equality, earned merit. Her very existence invalidated his beliefs. And deep down, that terrified him. He insulted her to regain control, to reaffirm the crumbling ideology he had inherited. But it never worked. She kept proving him wrong, brilliantly, relentlessly. His respect was not the kind that bloomed into friendship or affection. It was the kind that comes from being defeated again and again by someone who never meant to destroy you but simply refused to be diminished. Hermione Granger had never needed Draco Malfoy's respect, and that perhaps was why she earned it. He would never say her name with warmth, but he would never again say it with disdain either. Because behind every cruel word he once uttered was a boy battling his own ignorance, and behind every silence afterward, a man remembering the girl who broke his world apart and built something better in its place. Number 20, his mother was his true anchor. Draco Malfoy is a name that conjures immediate images of arrogance, privilege, and cruelty. Most readers, upon hearing his name, instinctively think of Lucius Malfoy, the stern, silver-haired patriarch who walked through life with a cane in one hand and the weight of pure-blood superiority in the other. Lucius, in the early books, appears as Draco's guiding figure, someone whose ideology, mannerisms, and ambitions the boy copies with almost theatrical precision. But beneath the facade of Draco's loyalty to his father lies another, far more intimate influence, his mother, Narcissa Malfoy. Though often silent and reserved, she emerges in the darkest hours of the series, not just as a protector, but as the cornerstone of Draco's moral compass. She does not guide with threats or ideology, she saves with love, and her quiet power ultimately reshapes the very core of her son. When Dumbledore falls and the Dark Lord takes over the Malfoy Manor as a base of operations, the air in the household thickens with dread. Lucius Malfoy is no longer the confident figure he once was. He is broken, humbled by Voldemort's disdain. Draco, expected to bask in glory after his supposed triumph over Dumbledore, is instead forced to watch his family sink deeper into the quicksand of servitude. It is during this time, when fear reigns and hope thins, that Narcissa rises. She does not crumble, she does not curse her fate. She holds her son in place with a quiet strength no spell could rival. The boy who once mocked others from behind his father's name now clings to his mother's presence as to the last beacon of stability. Inside the manor there's a moment that turns the tide of our understanding of Narcissa. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione are captured by Snatchers and brought to the drawing room, the Malfoys are faced with a crucial choice. Draco, whose face trembles with uncertainty, is asked to identify Harry. He hesitates. It's Narcissa who steps forward, her body shielding her son more than the prisoners. Her gaze lingers on Draco, not on the captives. The question Voldemort wants answered is simple. Is this boy the enemy? But for Narcissa, the real question is whether her son can survive another moment of cruelty. This is not a home anymore, it's a prison. Her silence, her composure, and her deliberate absence of pressure allow Draco the chance to hesitate. This is a mother offering her son a shred of humanity in a house where humanity has been stripped away, but the full magnitude of Narcissa's love is not revealed until the Forbidden Forest. There, she performs an act so layered, so dangerous, and yet so intimate that it redefines her entire role in the saga. When Voldemort demands that she check whether Harry is truly dead, she walks through bodies and ash to find the fallen boy. She leans in and instead of inspecting his pulse or testing for signs of life with magic, she whispers one question, "Is Draco alive?" And when Harry nods, she lies to the Dark Lord. She proclaims him dead. This lie, born not out of rebellion, but out of a mother's desperate love, saves Harry's life, and more. Importantly, it reveals that Draco, not Voldemort, is her world, that the battle means nothing to her unless her child survives it. What makes this moment so piercing is its calmness. Narcissa doesn't cry, she doesn't plead, she acts with the stillness of someone who has made peace with her priorities. Her silence speaks of sleepless nights, of watching Draco wander the corridors of their home like a ghost after Dumbledore's death, of tending to a son who was too young to be a killer but too ashamed to speak of it. She sees his torment, the way he no longer looks people in the eyes, the way his hands tremble when he thinks no one is watching. And she cannot save him with spells or gold, so she saves him with a lie. Earlier, in Half-Blood Prince, Narcissa's desperation leads her to Severus Snape. She defies her husband, the Death Eaters, and the Dark Lord's orders by stepping into Spinner's End with her sister Bellatrix in tow. She is not just pleading, she is orchestrating. The Dark Lord has ordered Draco to murder Dumbledore, she says, her voice quivering. But then she grabs Snape's hands and whispers, "You must swear to look after him, protect him. If Draco fails..." This is the most dangerous kind of love, one that breaks oaths and builds new ones on trembling ground. Narcissa is not asking for comfort. She's preparing a backup plan in case the nightmare becomes real. She is alone in her mission to keep Draco breathing. This moment illustrates something Lucius never gives Draco: foresight born of fear, strength born of love. Lucius offers pride, family legacy and politics. Narcissa offers protection, even if it means defying everyone she knows. In her son's greatest trial, she refuses to be a bystander, and while Lucius is reduced to pacing hallways and drinking in silence, it is Narcissa who confronts fate head-on. Draco watches her, and in doing so he learns that family is not built on ideology, but on loyalty and sacrifice. Draco was never truly a villain. He was a boy raised to believe he was better than others, thrown into a war he didn't understand, given a task no child should face. When the time came to kill Dumbledore, he didn't. He stood there, wand shaking, soul split between expectation and fear. It wasn't courage that stopped him. It was a breaking heart. But it is the memory of Narcissa that fills that pause. Somewhere deep down, he knows his mother would rather see him live in shame than die in false glory, and so he lowers his wand. It is not Lucius's ideals that echo in Draco's mind at that moment. It is Narcissa's love. In Deathly Hallows, when the trio escapes the Malfoy manor, Narcissa doesn't join the chase. She doesn't scream for retribution. She doesn't fight. Her attention remains on Draco, who stands there, visibly lost. And when the final battle at Hogwarts begins, the Malfoys do not stand with the Dark Lord. They stand as a family outside the fray. While other Death Eaters die for ideology, the Malfoys search for their son. Narcissa holds Lucius's hand, but her eyes search the crowd for Draco. That is their final rebellion, choosing love over loyalty to darkness. There's a scene, nearly silent in its writing, but thunderous in implication. After Voldemort's defeat, as the Great Hall mourns and celebrates, the Malfoys walk through the rubble. They are not arrested, they are not hailed, they are ignored, they do not ask for redemption. Narcissa walks with her son between the wounded and the triumphant. No words are spoken, no wands are drawn. She simply places a hand on Draco's back and guides him forward. There is no more fight in her. There is only the need to get her child home. Draco's transformation in the Cursed Child gives us the final glimpse into the lessons he took from Narcissa. As a father, he becomes quiet, protective, even soft. He speaks of his wife with deep pain and his son with quiet reverence. He admits that he never had true friends, and perhaps that is why Scorpius matters so much to him. He doesn't raise his son with Lucius's arrogance. He raises him with Narcissa's care. His instincts are no longer to dominate, but to protect. And when danger looms, he doesn't seek power, he seeks understanding. Narcissa's legacy lives in the way Draco learns to love. Lucius Malfoy was Draco's mirror. Narcissa was his anchor in a world that tried to pull the boy in all directions: Death Eaters, schoolyard rivalry, war, betrayal. She gave him something to hold on to. Her love was not loud, it did not roar. It whispered through actions, slipped through quiet choices, and carved itself into Draco's decisions. When the world lost its shape, Narcissa gave her son something precious: the ability to choose love over fear, And perhaps the reason readers overlook her influence is because she never wanted recognition. Narcissa didn't act to be remembered, she acted so her son could live long enough to remember for himself. In many ways, that is the most powerful magic in the series. Not the killing curse, not the Elder Wand, but a mother's lie, spoken at the edge of a battlefield. Her story is not about grandeur, it's about survival, not about politics, but priorities, not about the Malfoy name, but the Malfoy boy. Narcissa taught Draco that love is not weakness, it is the strength to lie, to risk, to protect, even if no one ever knows. In a world where mothers are often absent, silent, or tragic, Narcissa stands apart. She is not warm, not soft-spoken, but she is solid. Her presence teaches Draco what no spell could. That family is not who speaks loudest, but who acts when the silence is deadly. The books never scream her story, they whisper it through clenched hands, sleepless nights, and the quiet beat of a heart willing to risk everything. And Draco, in the end, becomes her echo, a man who chooses fatherhood over fame, who protects instead of conquers, and who carries the softest part of his mother's soul, hidden under his father's name. Draco Malfoy's greatest influence was never the man who gave him his wand, but the woman who made sure he never had to use it. And in that truth, we find a version of the story even more moving than the fall of Voldemort, the quiet rescue of a boy, one loving act at a time. Number 21. He was a victim of the system. Draco Malfoy stood at the edge of the room of requirement, shoulders stiff beneath his black school robe. The vanishing cabinet beside him loomed like a dark promise. Few realized that in this moment, when his fingers trembled against the cold wood, Draco was not making a choice. He was enacting one that had been made for him long ago. His every step toward darkness had been paved with expectation, lineage, and fear. He was not a boy embracing cruelty for pleasure. He was a boy performing a role scripted by others, imprisoned by an ideology stitched into the fabric of his name. Draco Lucius Malfoy, heir to a house steeped in generations of pure blood pride, was born into a world where deviation was weakness and loyalty to family mattered more than truth. The Malfoy family was old, powerful, and ideologically rigid. From his earliest days, Draco was raised in a manor surrounded by signs of supremacy. The portraits on the walls didn't depict heroes of bravery or compassion. They depicted ancestors who had married within the sacred 28, spoken against Muggle-borns, and furthered the purity of bloodline. Narcissa Malfoy whispered lullabies while Lucius lectured on legacy. Their son never had the luxury of forming his own opinions. His understanding of right and wrong came pre-packaged, wrapped in silver spoons and serpent-shaped cufflinks. The first stories he heard about the world weren't fairy tales. They were tales of the fall of the Dark Lord and the disgrace of those who betrayed blood. At Hogwarts, Draco walked into Slytherin not by accident, but by design. The sorting hat barely touched his head before it declared the house of cunning, resource, and ambition. And yet, even within the house that most resembled his upbringing, Draco stood apart, not because of what he was, but because of who he was expected to be. Children like Theodore Nott and Daphne Greengrass could afford to be indifferent. Draco, as the son of Lucius Malfoy, could not. He carried the burden of legacy in every class, every duel, every sneer. The system he represented didn't reward silence, it demanded demonstration. His animosity toward Harry Potter was never purely personal. From their first meeting on the Hogwarts Express, Draco attempted to forge an alliance, offering Harry a place among the right sort. When rejected, his hostility became a tool of performance. He wasn't just lashing out, he was defending his worldview, one he hadn't been allowed to question. "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter," he said, in the Philosopher's Stone, parroting beliefs instilled long before he understood their meaning. He wasn't simply speaking as Draco, he was echoing Lucius. In his second year, Draco was widely assumed to be the heir of Slytherin. The assumption was not unfounded. His disdain for Muggleborns, especially Hermione, had been loud and cruel. "You'll be next, mudbloods," he had jeered after Mrs. Norris was found petrified. But beneath the bluster was a boy regurgitating the ideology of his father. When confronted with real consequences, the horror of the attacks, the fear spreading across the school, Draco's performance faltered. He wasn't brave enough to stop the madness, but neither was he truly capable of causing it. He postured like a villain, but he lacked the darkness in his heart to be one. By fourth year, during the Triwizard Tournament, Draco began showing cracks in his armor. He mocked Harry, wore a Potter Stinks badge, and threw hexes in the corridors. But all of this masked a deeper fear of losing control, of being overshadowed. Cedric Diggory, a Hufflepuff, was more admired. Harry, a half-blood, had faced Voldemort and lived. Draco, meanwhile, remained a pawn in the games of men like Lucius and Barty Crouch Jr. When the Dark Mark was cast at the Quidditch World Cup, Draco's expression wasn't one of excitement, it was of calculation. He was old enough to understand what it meant, but not old enough to confront it. The real test came in sixth year. After Lucius was imprisoned, the Dark Lord turned his eyes on the Malfoy heir. To punish the family and prove loyalty, Draco was given a task no child should bear: assassinate Albus Dumbledore. He was 16, just beginning to understand that the world wasn't black and white, and yet he was handed a mission steeped in blood. His hands weren't made for murder, but fear, real, paralyzing fear, drove him forward. He repaired the vanishing cabinet for months, each failure another beat in his slow collapse. As the book narrates in The Half-Blood Prince, Draco was looking paler than ever, and there were dark shadows under his eyes. No longer the sneering Prince of Slytherin, he was a boy unraveling. In the bathroom scene, with Moaning Myrtle, Draco's humanity was laid bare. Harry found him crying, hunched over the sink, shattering the image of the untouchable bully. When confronted, Draco responded with aggression, not because he wanted to fight, but because he didn't know how to ask for help. Sectum Sempra sliced him open, both literally and metaphorically. He bled not only from his chest, but from the seams of a persona too heavy to carry. The trauma wasn't just physical, it was the fracture of a system's illusion. On the astronomy tower, Draco finally faced his fate. Wand in hand, he stood before Dumbledore, who offered him a path out. "You are not a killer, Draco," said the headmaster gently. Draco's hand shook. He didn't lower his wand, but neither could he cast the curse. When the Death Eaters arrived, he lowered his gaze, paralyzed by the realization that he wasn't in control. Snape delivered the fatal blow, and Draco, though spared from murder, was not spared from guilt. That night, he saw that being a Malfoy meant being used. After the war, the Malfoy family returned to a world that no longer revered bloodline. Lucius, stripped of power, faded into the background. Narcissa, though redeemed in part for saving Harry, withdrew into the shadows, and Draco became quiet. At the epilogue in the Deathly Hallows, he stands with his wife and son, watching the next generation board the Hogwarts Express. He doesn't speak, he doesn't scowl, he merely nods. In that silence is the voice of a man who has seen the cost of legacy and chosen not to pass it on. It is easy to brand Draco Malfoy as a villain, but harder to understand him as a prisoner. His cruelty wasn't born from sadism, but from indoctrination. When he called Hermione a mudblood, he wasn't asserting independent hate. He was mimicking the language of adults who told him it was truth. When he dueled Harry, it wasn't to destroy him, but to defend the honor he was told mattered. When he fixed the vanishing cabinet, he wasn't chasing glory, but trying to protect his mother from the consequences of failure. In truth, Draco's story is one of indoctrination and delayed awakening. He was not an active architect of Voldemort's rise, but rather a boy tangled in the web of power and expectation. The quote, Draco Malfoy is not a killer speaks to more than just a single event. It defines the arc of a character whose actions were shaped more by fear than conviction. He was born into a house with silver-spooned venom and taught that tradition was worth more than morality. To break free from that took more courage than most will ever know. Astoria Greengrass, Draco's wife, came from a family more moderate than his own. She had suffered from a blood curse, and her worldview was one shaped by both privilege and fragility. Together they chose to raise their son, Scorpius, away from the obsession with blood status. It wasn't rebellion, it was healing. Draco, now an adult, did what his father could not. He rejected the system that raised him, and in doing so he admitted that it had failed him. The wizarding world often celebrates the obvious heroes, Harry, Hermione, Neville, but forgets the quiet transformations. Draco's journey didn't end with a duel or a grand redemption. It ended with reflection. The legacy he chose to create was not written in the histories of the Order or the Ministry, but in the quiet choices of a father trying to do better. In The Cursed Child, we see more of this transformation. Draco is no longer arrogant or hostile. He mourns his wife deeply. He's protective of Scorpius. He even allies with Harry, not out of friendship, but out of shared concern for their sons. "My son doesn't need to be told that he's like his father," Draco says. "He needs to be told that he's his own man." It is the most powerful admission he ever makes, because it proves that Draco now understands the cost of identity built on someone else's ideals. Draco Malfoy was never innocent. He caused pain and he made choices that hurt others. But beneath those choices was a child starved of perspective, caged in the prison of pure blood arrogance and manipulated by adults who saw him as an instrument. His redemption wasn't loud. It was in the silences, in the glances, in the absence of hate where once it had festered. In the end, Draco's story isn't about evil. It's about escape, about the long, winding road from indoctrination to independence, about the strength it takes to unlearn, to look at a child and decide not to teach them what you were taught. He was a victim not of war, but of ideology. And though his wounds never bled openly, they were deep. He wore them beneath his robes, under his sneer, behind his pale grey eyes. Draco Malfoy was not born cruel. He was made cruel by a world that promised him power in exchange for obedience. But he walked away. And in that choice he became something more than a Malfoy. He became free. Number 22, he wanted to be someone else. There was a moment, small and easily missed, when Draco Malfoy lowered his wand. It happened in the astronomy tower, in the silence before chaos as Dumbledore stood before him, calm and exposed. Draco had every reason, every order, every ounce of fear pressing on him to act. Yet he didn't, because deep inside, beneath the pride and sneers and the weight of his surname, Draco Malfoy never truly wanted to be the boy others expected him to be. From his very first appearance in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Draco was painted with the colours of arrogance and entitlement. His family background, his disdain for Muggleborns, and his constant need to assert superiority made him easy to dislike. But those were masks, crafted early, worn tightly, and inherited without consent. Lucius Malfoy's grip on his son's worldview was firm, but not unbreakable. And it was within those cracks that a different Draco lived, quiet, uncertain, and observant. There's a haunting quality to the way Draco looks at others. His gaze always lingers longer on Harry than on anyone else, not just out of rivalry, but out of something deeper. Envy, perhaps, but not just of fame. Draco watched a boy who had no bloodline protection, no ancient fortune, and yet was free. Free to choose his friends, free to challenge authority, free to belong without kneeling. It's in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince that this longing surfaces like a bruise under the skin, visible and painful. When Draco isolates himself in the Room of Requirement, tinkering with the vanishing cabinet, He's not just planning an invasion, he's wrestling with the burden of expectation. In the corridor scenes, Draco's pale face looks more hollow than ever. His shoulders, once squared in youthful pride, slump beneath the invisible weight of Voldemort's command. When Harry confronts him in the bathroom, perhaps the most revealing moment of all, Draco breaks, he cries, his wand trembles. He doesn't speak in clever insults or deliver a tirade of house pride. He weeps, blood on the floor, fear in his eyes, and a truth undeniable. He is a boy who never wanted to become a killer. He was raised to revere power. The Malfoy name dripped with influence, built on centuries of pure-blood elitism and cold alliances. Lucius, who once gloated about his connections at the ministry, expected nothing less than submission to that legacy. Yet Draco saw what power did. He saw it when his father was humiliated by Dobby's freedom. He saw it when Lucius failed Voldemort and became a shell of the man who once strutted through the halls of the manor. Power turned men to ghosts. Draco, for all his sneering, feared that fate. Throughout the series, Draco clings to his identity like armor, but every time he confronts Harry, his defiance grows less convincing. The duels, the insults, the schemes, they all begin to feel like rituals he no longer believes in. Even in the Goblet of Fire, when he mocks Hermione and baits Ron, there's a hollowness behind his words, like a boy acting out lines he was taught rather than ones he believes. His taunts about mudbloods feel rehearsed, sharp but brittle. Behind every cruel word is a question he dare not ask. What if they were right? It was during his 6th year that Draco truly unraveled. The bathroom duel, his absence from Quidditch, the cold looks, the gaunt appearance, all of it pointed to a boy in crisis. "You don't understand," he whispers once, and those words echo louder than any spell. No, most didn't understand, not even his closest allies. Crabbe and Goyle remained muscle and shadow. Pansy clung to him like a badge of status, but none of them saw what Draco saw in the mirror, a face caught between legacy and conscience. Bellatrix Lestrange, his aunt and tormentor, only made things worse. Her presence in Malfoy Manor was a constant reminder of what loyalty to Voldemort required. Madness, bloodlust, obedience. She laughed at suffering and demanded devotion. Draco flinched at her laughter. He may have idolized Slytherin cunning, but he did not hunger for cruelty. When she tortured Hermione, Draco didn't look. He stood to the side, silent, helpless, ashamed. That silence spoke volumes. He wasn't brave like Harry, but he refused to become like Bellatrix. And then came the task: kill Albus Dumbledore. A command from Voldemort himself. Failure meant death. Yet Draco stalled. He sabotaged. He tried alternate entries. He hesitated. Because at his core, Draco knew something essential. Once you take a life, you lose a part of your own. In The Half-Blood Prince, the moment when Dumbledore calmly speaks to Draco is not just suspense, it is revelation. "Draco, you are not a killer," Dumbledore says gently. And for once, Draco hears a truth that aligns with his secret self. Even Severus Snape, a man Draco was taught to trust, saw the boy's torment. Snape took the unbreakable vow not just for strategy, but because he knew Draco would fail. Not for lack of cunning, but for lack of darkness. Snape, perhaps more than anyone, understood the cost of choosing sides too early, and he saw in Draco a chance to avoid that same damnation. When Snape casts the fatal spell, Draco's face is stricken, not with relief, but with horror. He didn't want this. He didn't ask for this. He just wanted to survive. Survival, however, came at a price. In the Deathly Hallows, Draco is a husk of his former self. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione are captured and brought to Malfoy Manor, he has the chance to confirm Harry's identity. He doesn't. He stalls. He lies. "I can't be sure," he mutters. It's a whisper of defiance in a house full of tyrants, a whisper that may have saved lives. This moment, subtle and often overlooked, is a turning point. Draco chooses silence over betrayal. There's a brilliance in how Rowling shows Draco's transformation, not in grand gestures, but in quiet refusals. He doesn't join the Order, he doesn't fight in the final battle, but he doesn't stand with Voldemort either. He retreats not out of cowardice, but out of self-preservation and clarity. He's tired of being someone else's soldier, tired of scripts written by fathers and Dark Lords. In the Battle of Hogwarts, he searches for his friends, not enemies, and when the dust settles, he walks away not with triumph, but with his life. The final image of Draco in the books is profoundly human. On platform 9 3/4, 19 years later, he stands with his wife and son, distant but calm. He doesn't sneer at Harry, he doesn't mock Albus Severus. He simply nods. There is no more war in his eyes, no need to assert superiority. He has found peace not in conquest but in separation. He is no longer the boy who tried to please his father. He is a man who chose a different path. His son Scorpius is the clearest evidence of Draco's inner revolution. In The Cursed Child, Scorpius is bright, kind, and curious, traits his younger self would have scorned. But Draco nurtures him, protects him, encourages him. When others whisper rumors about Scorpius's parentage, Draco defends his family without venom. He has learned that dignity isn't inherited, it's earned, through choice, through quiet courage, through love. The Draco Malfoy who once called Hermione a mudblood now raises a son who befriends her daughter. The boy who once bragged about his wealth now watches his son bond with Harry Potter's child. There is poetic justice in that. Not vengeance, just growth, just change. Draco does not ask for forgiveness, but he lives in a way that makes forgiveness possible. The books never gave Draco a redemption arc in the traditional sense. He didn't sacrifice himself in a blaze of glory. He didn't give a speech or renounce his family name. But he did something harder. He survived his upbringing and refused to pass on its poison. He let the war end with him. That choice, though quiet, is revolutionary. Draco's complexity lies in his contradictions. He is cruel and kind, arrogant and insecure, loyal and questioning. He is not a hero, nor is he a true villain. He is a boy shaped by a broken world who chose, eventually, not to break others in turn. And in that choice he became something rare, a Slytherin who found strength in restraint, not in dominance. Throughout the books, one can trace the slow, painful emergence of Draco's conscience. In Order of the Phoenix, when his father is arrested, there is no triumph in Draco's voice, just bitterness and perhaps fear. He begins to see that the system he trusted is flawed, that blood purity doesn't shield against downfall, that power is fickle. These realizations do not turn him into a saint, but they unsettle his certainty. And that's where change begins, with discomfort. It is easy to dismiss Draco as a product of his environment, but he fought, internally, silently, to be more than that. He failed often, hurt others, made terrible choices, but he also resisted when it mattered most. He didn't kill, he didn't betray, he didn't surrender, and for someone raised in a world where surrender to power was the only option, that is no small feat. Harry saw this eventually. That final nod on the platform isn't just a formality, it's acknowledgement, respect. The boy who once called Draco his enemy now sees him as a peer, not a friend perhaps, but an equal in life's hardest battle, becoming better than your past. And in that final image, Draco Malfoy becomes the boy he always wanted to be, not louder, richer, or stronger, just freer. Number 23. He didn't enjoy cruelty. Draco Malfoy had always carried the image of a spoiled aristocrat, a boy who insulted, mocked, and sneered with theatrical precision. He called Hermione a mudblood with such deliberate venom that the word hung in the air like poison. He laughed when Neville fell. He smirked when Harry was scolded or embarrassed. He existed, it seemed, to embody cruelty in its most adolescent form. But something in the cadence of his actions hinted at a performance. There was a practiced rhythm to his malice, as though it was rehearsed, expected, even required of him. And when the stage of Hogwarts transformed into the terrifying theatre of war, the illusion of Draco's cruelty began to crack. The boy who had once swaggered through the corridors of Hogwarts, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, shrank into silence when forced into Voldemort's inner circle. His presence at the Malfoy Manor during the events of Deathly Hallows revealed a boy far removed from the brash schoolyard antagonist. When Bellatrix Lestrange tortured Hermione in the drawing room, Draco didn't watch. He didn't laugh. He didn't taunt. He looked away. "Draco, is that Potter?" his aunt demanded, pointing to the disfigured boy in front of her. "I can't be sure," he muttered, but he knew. He recognized Harry Potter instantly. And he chose silence, not out of cowardice, but out of refusal to participate. This refusal is critical. It is easy to see Draco's inaction as weakness, but the truth is more painful. It is the hesitance of someone raised among wolves, suddenly realizing he's no longer pretending. Draco had always played the part of a pure blood supremacist, yet when blood stained the floors of his family home, it wasn't triumph he felt. It was nausea. He flinched from violence. He didn't stop Bellatrix. He couldn't, but he didn't enjoy it. That is the fracture that tells the real story. A boy raised to see himself as superior, now helpless, as his world demands he become a monster. Years earlier, during the events of Half-Blood Prince, Draco was assigned a task no child should bear: assassinate Albus Dumbledore. At 16, he became an unwilling agent of death, yet he couldn't do it. He toyed with the plan, repaired the vanishing cabinet, allowed Death Eaters into the castle, and still, when the moment came, he trembled. "Draco," Dumbledore said gently, "you are not a killer." And he wasn't. His wand hand shook. His eyes were wide with terror. He did not raise his voice. He pleaded, he waited, until Severus Snape stepped forward to do what Draco could not. That moment cemented the truth. The cruelty Draco displayed at school was a mask. Behind it lived fear, confusion, and a desire to be anything but what Voldemort needed him to become. The scene in the astronomy tower is the climax of Draco's internal war. He had succeeded in infiltrating Hogwarts, succeeded in disarming the most powerful wizard in the school, and yet, standing on the threshold of infamy, he hesitated. "I have to do this," he whispered. But there was no joy in his voice, only dread. He didn't gloat, he didn't boast, he tried to stall. Even in his victory, he was lost. This was not the boy who had smirked when Buckbeak was sentenced or laughed at Ron's tattered robes. This was a teenager, crushed under the weight of expectations, fighting to retain some flicker of conscience. What's more, Draco's retreat into silence becomes more pronounced as the series progresses. In Half-Blood Prince, he isolates himself, avoiding his usual crowd, withdrawing from laughter and hallway insults. He spends hours alone in the room of requirement, obsessed not with domination, but survival. His shoulders slump. He no longer argues with Hermione in class. He stops baiting Harry. He becomes a ghost within the castle, haunted by what he knows is coming. And that ghost refuses to enjoy what his family and Voldemort believe should thrill him. One of the most telling scenes occurs in Deathly Hallows, when the Snatchers bring Harry, Ron and Hermione to Malfoy Manor. Hermione has been tortured. Her screams echo through the house. And yet Draco says nothing. His parents hover, Lucius eager to impress the Dark Lord, Narcissa tight-lipped with fear. But Draco, he stands apart. He cannot meet Hermione's eyes. He cannot acknowledge her pain, because doing so would break him. This is not a sadist. This is a boy in shock, a child trying to disappear. Even when he is asked to identify Harry, a moment that could redeem him in the eyes of Voldemort, He hesitates. "I don't know," he says, despite knowing exactly who Harry is. That moment is not cowardice, it is defiance. Quiet, shivering defiance, but defiance nonetheless. It is Draco refusing to contribute to death again, because by then he has already seen what death does. He has already heard screams in his own home, and the boy who once flung slurs with a smile now flinches at every raised voice. Draco's early behavior, the taunts, the slights, the cruel jokes, are the byproduct of a system that rewarded arrogance. His father praised him for humiliating Muggle-borns. His peers laughed when he insulted others. But that cruelty was performative. It did not age well. It did not harden him. When faced with real suffering, Draco crumbled, and in that collapse we see something remarkable. The boy still had a heart. Consider his treatment of moaning Myrtle. While most students avoided her, Draco confided in her during his 6th year. Myrtle, a ghost known for her misery, became his confidant. He cried in front of her. He told her about the mission he could not complete. He wept over the curse placed upon his family. He showed her vulnerability, something he had hidden from everyone else. "No one can help me," he said to her. And Myrtle, touched, told Harry later. He's really sensitive, you know, underneath. Draco's connection to Myrtle matters. It is the first time he shows emotional honesty to someone outside his family. It is a glimpse into his fractured psyche. He wasn't plotting domination, he was trying not to fall apart. And in the company of a ghost, he could let the mask slip. That doesn't excuse his earlier cruelty, but it reframes it. It shows that the aggression was a defense mechanism, not a natural inclination. Even Dumbledore recognized this. When speaking to Snape, he said, "Draco is trying very hard to mend his ways." The headmaster understood that Draco's mission to kill him was not born of ambition but fear. That's why Dumbledore offered him mercy, even with a wand pointed at his chest. He saw that Draco was not a killer. He saw that the cruelty had never taken root in his soul. After the war, this becomes even clearer. In The Cursed Child, an older Draco confesses his regrets. He speaks of loneliness, of how he never had true friends, only followers. He says, "I had to prove myself every day. My father thought I had to be better, meaner, stronger. I didn't want to be any of that." His confession is raw. It confirms what readers suspected, that behind the arrogance was emptiness, and behind the emptiness, pain. Draco Malfoy was not a saint. He did terrible things. He bullied, he insulted, he enjoyed attention at the expense of others. But when confronted with real evil, when blood hit the floor, when curses were flung in rage, he recoiled. He was not thrilled by the power, he was afraid of it, and that fear, though selfish, spared him from becoming what his family hoped he would be. Even his mother, Narcissa, made a choice that redefined the Malfoy legacy. She lied to Voldemort about Harry being dead in the forest, not out of loyalty to the Order, but to protect her son. She understood that cruelty had cost them everything, and so she took a chance on mercy. That act, that small, trembling act of protection, speaks volumes about what Draco inherited and what he ultimately passed on. In the end, Draco Malfoy is a tragedy in slow motion, a boy who mimicked cruelty until it stared him in the face, a child who realized too late that the world he was raised in was rotten, and yet he did not embrace that rot, he survived it, and though he did not fight alongside Harry and the others in the final battle, his silence was not submission. It was refusal, quiet but firm, the kind of refusal that breaks cycles. There is no moment where Draco becomes a hero. That is not his story. His story is the story of someone who almost became a villain and stepped back from the edge. That is rarer, that is harder, and that is more human, because true cruelty is consistent. It rejoices in pain. But Draco Malfoy, in the moments that mattered most, turned his face away, And sometimes that is the bravest thing a person can do. Number 24, he explored dark magic, but not for evil. Draco Malfoy always seemed the perfect Slytherin, proud, cunning, and cruel. But that reputation masked something more fragile, more painfully human beneath the surface. While other boys sought mischief or glory, Draco sought something harder to grasp: control. In a world that demanded strength, that worshipped dominance, and in a family that revered blood purity and power, Draco was merely a boy trying to keep himself from drowning in expectations. His interest in the dark arts, often cited as proof of his malevolence, was never about destruction. It was about identity, fear, and the illusion of power in a life where he felt helpless. He had been raised on legends of the Dark Lord, stories told in hushed tones behind velvet curtains at elite gatherings of pure-blood families. He heard of spells that could bend wills, hexes that could cripple, and enchantments that promised immortality. As a child, these were bedtime stories. As a teenager, they became a coping mechanism. The library at Malfoy Manor held tomes others had long burned or banned, volumes bound in dragonhide, inked in unsettling shades. One book in particular, Noctis Obscura, lay hidden behind a sliding panel, and Draco would sneak it to his room late at night. Not to memorize curses, but to understand the roots of power that his father never truly explained. In Hogwarts, he mimicked the arrogance expected of him. He hurled slurs, picked fights, and held court in the Slytherin common room with flippant sneers. But these were masks. Draco Malfoy, the amazing bouncing ferret, Professor McGonagall once said dryly, referencing the time Moody had transformed him. That moment humiliated him, but deeper still it reminded him that magic, when not yours, could strip you of all dignity. His exploration of dark arts was born in moments like these. Not to hurt others, but to never be humiliated again. When he befriended Theodore Nott and Blaise Zabini, it wasn't because of shared cruelty, but shared curiosity. Nott's father had once been a Death Eater like Lucius. Blaise's mother had cycled through powerful husbands, all of whom ended mysteriously dead. These boys, like Draco, knew that in their world, survival meant knowing the rules of darkness, even if you never intended to play the game. Together they studied the theory behind non-verbal hexes, and they argued over the historical implications of the Fidelius charm being considered light magic when it could just as easily be abused. This wasn't villainy, it was education in the only language their world respected. Draco's use of the Cruciatus curse was often used as damning evidence of his descent into evil. But even Bellatrix Lestrange, the embodiment of fanaticism, mocked him. "You need to mean them, Draco," she said, frustrated when he failed to cause significant pain. He didn't mean them. He never had. The boy who stood paralyzed in the astronomy tower as Dumbledore lowered his wand wasn't a killer. He was a child asked to betray his own soul for the approval of a man who had marked his family. "You are not a killer, Draco," Dumbledore said softly. And Draco wasn't. In his 6th year, he obsessively worked on the Vanishing Cabinet, not because he believed in Voldemort's cause, but because he saw no other option. The Dark Lord's threats were not abstract. Narcissa Malfoy had made an unbreakable vow to protect her son. Lucius had already fallen from grace. Failure meant death. When students whispered that Draco had gone dark, they misunderstood the tragedy. He wasn't seduced by evil. He was trapped. He hoped the dark arts could offer him an escape route with dignity, a way to survive without falling apart. Professor Snape saw this. A former dabbler in the dark himself, he understood that curiosity could be born from fear, not cruelty. He protected Draco more fiercely than any student, shielding him even from Voldemort. Snape saw what others did not. The boy was cracking under the weight of expectation. And in Snape's office, Draco once stared at an open volume of Magia Mortifera, pretending to be indifferent. But Snape recognized the trembling in his voice when he asked how one survived a killing curse without dying. That wasn't a tactical question. It was a cry for help. During one winter evening, Pansy Parkinson found Draco in the Slytherin common room poring over a scroll that outlined soul magic, ancient rites that discussed the fragmentation of essence as a form of protection. He wasn't looking to split his soul. He was trying to understand what Voldemort had done, as if understanding the Dark Lord's inhumanity could help him avoid the same fate. He was frightened of becoming what he was expected to be. Even when he was cruel to others, it often came from panic. When he taunted Hermione about her blood, when he mocked Hagrid or smirked at Harry, it was performance. At night, alone, he stared into the dormitory ceiling and tried to measure the difference between power and control. The two were not the same, and Draco learned that too late. After the war, many forgot that he never joined the final battle on Voldemort's side. In the room of requirement, he was more confused than committed. He did not hex Harry when he could have. He did not stop them from destroying the diadem. When the fire surged through the room and death came roaring through the flames, Draco was the one who needed saving, not because he was evil, but because he was lost. Years later, as a man, he would visit Knockturn Alley not to relive darkness, but to confront it. He studied magical history and its abuses, trying to learn how people like him had been seduced by the illusion of strength. In conversations with Grigorovich's apprentice, he asked about wands imbued with cursed wood, not to buy them, but to understand why they were made. He grew into a quiet, watchful presence in the wizarding world, rarely celebrated, but often misunderstood. He sent his son Scorpius to Hogwarts with no heirlooms of arrogance. He did not instruct him to hate or even to be proud. He asked only that the boy learn to be kind. "Sometimes we study darkness," he told him once, "to better appreciate the light." He no longer feared the truth of his past. He wore it like armor. That curiosity in the dark arts was once a wound. Now it was a scar that taught him humility. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Draco tells Dumbledore, "I have to do this, he'll kill me." That confession was not a villain's last words. It was a terrified teenager admitting he had no idea how to escape. And even as he lowered his wand, his hand shook, not with rage, but with despair. He hadn't become Voldemort's servant. He'd become his hostage. The Daily Prophet never told that story. They printed pictures of a pale, stunned Draco leaving the Battle of Hogwarts beside his mother and father, all of them untouched by glory. But Hermione remembered how he had lowered his eyes when she passed him, not in arrogance, but in shame. Harry never forgave him, but he understood. That was enough. At Malfoy Manor, the old books remain. The ones Draco once read in desperation are now part of a locked study. He doesn't burn them, he reads them now and again, but with different eyes, not searching for spells to protect himself, but to protect others from the lies those books once whispered to him. There's an entry in Magia Mortifera that reads, "Power is not the spell you cast, but the reason you cast it." It's underlined in faded green ink, Draco's ink. He wrote it at 16, desperate to believe it. At 38, he believes it still. Few remember that he tried to identify Harry to the Snatchers and failed, not out of fear, but hesitation. That single hesitation may have saved lives. When questioned later, Draco simply said, "I wasn't sure," but deep down he was. He just couldn't say the words. That moment defined him, not as a coward, but as someone learning in real time how to choose a better path. Even Astoria, his wife, knew the truth. She once told a friend, "Draco's past doesn't frighten me, it makes me proud, because he looked into the dark and chose to walk away." And she was right. His journey through the shadows wasn't a descent, it was a climb, not heroic, not glorious, but real. Those who mock Draco for his failures miss the point. He never wanted to be feared, he wanted to matter. And in the end he learned that power wasn't in knowing the darkest spell, but in refusing to cast it. Number 25. He was too mature for his age. Draco Malfoy, for all his arrogance and sneering pride in earlier years at Hogwarts, underwent one of the most disturbing transformations in the series, one not marked by magical prowess or heroic action, but by a silent collapse under unbearable weight. Readers often focus on Harry, Ron and Hermione as the trio forced to grow up too quickly, their childhoods shattered by war. Yet Draco too was swept into the adult world of terror and power before his voice had fully deepened. At 16 he was no longer just a student. He was a pawn in a game of life and death, chosen not for skill but for bloodline status and his family's association with Voldemort. He became a boy walking a tightrope over the abyss, and no safety net waited beneath him. His assignment was nothing short of impossible: assassinate Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard of the age, the headmaster of his school, a man Draco had known since childhood. Failure would mean not his own death, but the death of his parents, Narcissa and Lucius Malfoy, who were already teetering on the edge of Voldemort's good graces. This wasn't a test of courage. It was psychological torment designed to corner him, break him, and ensure his obedience. He was expected to kill or die trying. The task alone would crush many adults. For a teenager, it bordered on cruelty. And yet, Draco never told a soul. That silence was its own kind of bravery, or perhaps fear so complete that it robbed him even of the relief of confession. Every morning he awoke knowing that he might not survive the day, and worse, that his failure might bring death to those he loved. The strain was not hidden. Readers who pay close attention will remember the subtle but unmistakable signs. By 6th year, Draco had changed. He had lost weight. His complexion grew pale, sickly. He became withdrawn, often seen disappearing into the room of requirement for hours at a time, re-emerging with dark circles under his eyes. There were dark shadows under his eyes and a distinctly greyish tinge to his skin, the narration tells us. It wasn't just stress, it was a body and soul buckling under impossible pressure. The Draco Malfoy of earlier books was cocky, loud, often cruel. He insulted Hermione's blood status with casual disdain, flaunted his wealth, and carried himself like someone certain of his place in the world. But by Half-Blood Prince, that mask was slipping. Readers may recall how he sat alone on the Hogwarts Express, not bragging with Crabbe and Goyle, but lost in thought. When confronted by Harry, he didn't even respond with insults. His silences became more frequent than his speeches. The superiority in his voice had vanished, replaced by something sullen, something hollow. He was crumbling inwardly, and no one, not even his own friends, noticed until it was too late. His double life began with deception, but it ended with desperation. Tasked with repairing a vanishing cabinet in the room of requirement, a broken artifact that would allow Death Eaters to enter the school, Draco worked in solitude, avoiding attention. The room became a prison and a workshop, a sacred chamber of guilt. This wasn't just schoolwork. This was sabotage. And Draco, while never described as particularly gifted academically, applied himself to this task with manic determination. Every failure brought him closer to doom. His methods grew erratic. He turned to Moaning Myrtle, the ghost, as his confidant, an odd but telling choice. A dead girl with no allegiance and no expectations. It says everything that Draco found more comfort in the company of a ghost than in any living peer. He was a boy with no way out. No victory was possible for Draco. If he succeeded in killing Dumbledore, he would forever carry the mark of a murderer, a pariah in any decent world. If he failed, he would be punished, and others would suffer for his failure. The nature of the task robbed him of innocence not by act, but by intent. Planning a murder is enough to change a person. Holding a wand in your hand with a kill command behind it, this breaks something inside. When Draco finally faces Dumbledore on the astronomy tower, wand shaking, sweat pouring down his face, The moment is thick with unbearable tension. He hesitates, and it is a hesitation that reveals more about his soul than any insult or boast ever could. "Draco, Draco, you are not a killer." Dumbledore's words strike through the darkness. And it's true, Draco isn't a killer. He is a boy who doesn't want this life, who doesn't want to bear this burden. But it doesn't matter to the Dark Lord. Voldemort is not interested in who Draco is, only what he can be used for. That is the essence of Draco's tragedy. He becomes invisible in his own story. Everyone sees the Malfoy heir, the symbol, the servant, the child of Death Eaters. No one sees the terrified boy gasping for air under the weight of expectation. Not even his teachers. Perhaps Snape sees, perhaps that is why he makes the unbreakable vow with Narcissa. Perhaps Snape, who has lived so long in dualities, recognizes a mirror in Draco. That vow, Snape's promise to kill Dumbledore in Draco's place if the boy fails, isn't just a plot device. It is an act of mercy, of recognition. Snape knows Draco may not be able to do it, and he takes on the guilt instead. When the moment arrives, Draco cannot complete the act. He stands, wand raised, but his hand trembles, and tears shimmer in his eyes. And so Snape steps forward and kills Dumbledore himself. But in doing so, he spares Draco from a deeper kind of death, because killing, truly killing, would have hollowed Draco completely. It would have ended whatever shred of innocence remained in him. Even after the death, Draco receives no reprieve. He is branded as a Death Eater, forced to participate in the Death Eaters' siege of Hogwarts, present at the horrific torture of students, and locked in a world he can no longer escape. He doesn't fight on either side, he doesn't scream, he doesn't cheer. He simply exists like a boy trapped in a nightmare. In Deathly Hallows we see Draco again, not triumphant, not bold, but hesitant, unsure, even pitiful. When Harry saves him from the fiend fire in the Room of Requirement, it's a moment of reversal. The boy who once mocked him now offers his life to rescue him. And Draco, burned, soot-covered and dazed, accepts it without a word. The power dynamic has flipped, not because Harry has grown stronger, but because Draco has faded. The war, in its cruel logic, took everything from Draco except his life. And in many ways, it took that too. By the epilogue, when he appears on Platform 934 with his wife and son Scorpius, there is no sign of the swaggering youth he once was. He nods quietly to Harry, a silent truce between men who survived different versions of the same war. His face is older, not just in years, but in sorrow. He is the image of someone who has seen too much, lost too much, and lives with quiet scars. While others earn their place in the sun through acts of valor, Draco's redemption is quieter. He lived. He chose not to kill. He chose to protect his son from the same fate. And that's what makes Draco's arc so quietly heartbreaking. He never had the chance to choose sides. His story is about a boy forced into a role he never wanted, living through horror without ever being given the dignity of recognition. He isn't remembered as a hero. He isn't celebrated or mourned in song, but he too grew up in war. He too bore burdens far beyond his years. And unlike others, he carried them in silence. Even in the Slytherin common room, once his kingdom, he became a ghost. Crabbe and Goyle, once his shadows, began acting without him. He had no one left to command or to confide in. The very house that once amplified his ego now became a reflection of his isolation. And still, he kept going. That perseverance, silent, painful, overlooked, is what defines Draco far more than his arrogance ever did. The boy who once bragged about blood status learned humility through suffering. Readers often forget that Draco was 16 when all this happened. 16, still a boy, still a student, still someone who once played Quidditch and bragged about broom models. The same boy who boasted about the Nimbus 2001 was later fixing broken cabinets to let monsters into his school. The The shift is more than character development. It's a descent, one he never asked for, one he barely survived. And yet Draco was never fully lost. That spark, the refusal to kill, the trembling hands, the broken voice, those are signs of humanity fighting to survive in a world trying to extinguish it. In the end, he emerged not as a hero, not as a villain, but as something more difficult to define, a survivor. And in a world like the one Rowling built, perhaps that is the rarest thing of all.